When that mom at the school potluck turned to her friend and said, "That's what happens when your mom's unemployed," I swear my heart stopped. She said it while laughing, like it was some harmless joke. My daughter Sarai heard her. I know she did, because I saw the way her shoulders dropped. She didn't say a word. She just stood there, holding the tray of food she had poured her entire heart into, wrapped in foil. No fancy label, no decorative garnish, just foil. The other moms kept smiling like they didn't hear it, like it was normal to insult a child for how her food looked. One even giggled. I stood there trying to steady my breath, pretending I hadn't heard it either because if I reacted, I'd make it worse. For Sarai, that's what it's like being the mom who doesn't fit in. You learn to stay quiet. Sarai glanced up at me with this look I'll never forget. Not angry, not even sad, just still. And in that stillness, I saw something shifting. She didn't cry, she didn't walk away. She just turned and quietly placed her tray on the table, like it meant something. And it did. That tray held jerk chicken she had seasoned herself, coconut rice with toasted flakes she had hand-pressed, and a mango glaze she'd tested 3 times the night before to get right. She's 12. And while other kids were bringing cupcakes from Costco or dishes their parents ordered from caterers, Sarai had been in our tiny kitchen all afternoon, cooking with care, using my grandmother's recipes, the ones she used to feed us when we didn't have much, but always made it feel like we had everything. That foil, to them, looked cheap. To us, it was a seal, a wrapping that said, "This is made with soul." They didn't know that. All they saw was the outside. Then the doors opened. A man in a black chef's coat walked in. I didn't recognize him at first, but I saw people turn. Phones started coming out. I heard someone whisper, "That's Remy Vargas, the chef from the show, the one with the Michelin star." Suddenly, the air changed. People were fidgeting, smiling, fixing their food displays. Brenda, the mom who made the comment, was practically vibrating next to her tiramisu, brushing off invisible crumbs. Everyone was hoping he'd stop at their dish, but he didn't. He walked right past the sushi platter, right past the rainbow cupcakes and the imported cheese spread. He stopped in front of the foil, and then he smiled. "Who made this?" he asked. And the whole room fell silent. 3 weeks before the potluck, I was laid off. They called it a department restructure, but I knew what it meant. I was the last one hired and the first one out. No warning, no severance, just a box, a handshake, and a goodbye. I remember walking out to my car in the parking lot with that box in my arms, staring at the sky like it might explain something. It didn't. Bills didn't stop coming just because I was stunned. I didn't tell Sarai right away. She's 12, but she carries weight like someone twice her age. She's always been that way. Quiet, observant, tuned into everything, even when no one thinks she's paying attention. I wanted to shield her from the panic sitting in my chest like a stone. I started driving Uber in the evenings, doing grocery delivery during the day, applying for jobs at night. It felt like drowning in motion. One afternoon, I found her in the kitchen with my grandmother's old recipe book open. Pages were stained and soft from years of use. Sarai was studying the jerk chicken recipe, making notes on a sticky pad. I leaned against the doorframe and asked what she was doing. She looked up and said, "The school's having a diversity potluck. Everyone's supposed to bring food that represents their culture." Her face was calm, but I saw something underneath. Excitement, maybe. Hope. I didn't want to crush it. I said, "That's a beautiful idea. What were you thinking of making?" She tapped the book. "This. Like when Nana used to wrap it in foil and say, 'You gotta trap the flavor or it runs off.' Remember that?" I nodded, but my throat tightened. My grandmother had passed away 2 years earlier. Sarai had only been 10, but she remembered everything Nana did in the kitchen. How she used whole cloves in her rice. How she never measured anything but made it taste the same every time. How she used foil because it kept the heat even and said, "This isn't just food, it's history." Sarai said, "We don't have to spend money, Mom. I can use what we already have." I told her no, not because I didn't believe in her, but because I didn't want her to feel different. I knew how those potlucks went. Pinterest dishes in glass trays, fancy little signs with fonts and flags, moms trying to outdo each other like it was a competition. I didn't want Sarai's heart ending up on a table only to be ignored. She didn't argue. She just said, "Let me try, please. I'll cook it myself." The next few days, she planned every detail. She asked me to pick up a few things with a grocery voucher I'd gotten: Scotch bonnet peppers, thyme, fresh ginger. She cleaned the kitchen without being asked. She washed her hands like a surgeon. She measured spices like they were gold dust. I watched from the side. Part of me wanted to take over, to fix or guide or correct, but I didn't. She was focused in a way I hadn't seen before. She wasn't doing this for attention or approval. She was doing it because it meant something to her. The night before the potluck, she cooked in silence, humming once in a while. She marinated the chicken, roasted the rice with coconut, and stood on her tiptoes to glaze the top with mango puree. She used foil, just like Nana, and wrapped each piece like a treasure. When she was done, she packed it all up, placed it in a reusable bag, and sat down next to me on the couch. She leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "I hope someone eats it." I wanted to promise they would. I wanted to say they'd love it, that she'd be the star, that her food would change minds. But I knew the world didn't always work that way, so I told her the truth. "I'm proud of you, no matter what happens tomorrow." She didn't say anything, just nodded against my shoulder. That was enough. The next morning, we got dressed, packed the food, and headed to the school gym. The place was already crowded when we arrived. Parents with big trays and wide smiles, children in colorful outfits, tables lined the walls with dishes and signs and flags and themes. It was loud and bright and buzzing. We found a small space at the end of the table and set down her foil tray. She smoothed the foil once, then stepped back and folded her hands in front of her. She stood straight, not tall, but strong. And that's when I saw Brenda Malloy across the room, setting down a glass trifle dish and laughing a little too loud. The same Brenda who once sent out an email correcting other moms' grammar, the one who called the potluck a cultural showcase in her newsletter. I could already feel the shift in the room. I took Sarai's hand. "You ready?" She looked up at me, nodded, and said, "Let's feed them." We walked into the gym with our heads high, but everything about the room told me we didn't belong there. The walls were lined with long tables covered in plastic tablecloths, and every single one looked like a magazine spread. Lasagna in glass pans with name cards, Korean bibimbap in color-coordinated bowls, even a sushi tower wrapped in LED lights. Some parents had brought in coolers with dry ice to keep desserts cold. Sarai carried her foil tray like it weighed nothing, but I knew better. It was heavy with hours of work and all the heart she had poured into it. She didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. She found a small space at the far end of the table, carefully set the tray down, and folded her hands in front of her like she was guarding something sacred. A few parents nearby gave polite glances. One mom offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then I saw Brenda. She was across the table arranging slices of tiramisu with gold sprinkles. Of course it wasn't homemade. Brenda Malloy was not the bake-it-yourself type. Everything she brought came from a high-end grocery store with French music playing in the background. She looked up and spotted us. "Oh, you're here," she said too loudly, "and what did you bring?" Before I could answer, she peeked under the foil. Her eyebrows lifted. She turned to the woman beside her and said in that fake whisper voice everyone could hear, "That's what happens when your mom's unemployed." My chest tightened. I looked at Sarai. She froze for a second, then kept her eyes on the tray. She didn't say anything. Her lips pressed together and she stepped back a little, like she was shrinking. I wanted to walk out. I wanted to take that tray and toss it in Brenda's face, but I couldn't do that to Sarai. Not here, not in front of all these people. I leaned down and whispered, "Do you want to go?" She shook her head once. "No," she said, "I want to stay." So we stayed. More people arrived. The buffet line formed, plates in hand, kids and parents moved through the tables, picking and choosing. They walked right past Sarai's tray. Not one person lifted the foil, not one question, nothing. A boy reached for a cupcake beside us, glanced at the foil-wrapped chicken, and kept moving. A dad in a button-down shirt leaned over the sushi like he was studying art, then turned away from Sarai's food like it wasn't even there. Brenda's tiramisu? Gone in 20 minutes. Her son walked around offering bites like a waiter at a wedding. People praised it like it was handcrafted in Milan. I stood behind Sarai and watched her eyes track every rejection. Each time someone passed her tray without stopping, I saw her shoulders fall just a little more. She didn't cry. She didn't complain. But I could see the heartbreak building. Her arms folded, her eyes stayed down. She started to fidget with the corner of the tablecloth. I leaned down again. "You did a beautiful job, baby. They just don't see it." She nodded but didn't speak. Then Brenda walked by again, this time holding a plate stacked with food she hadn't made. She glanced at Sarai's tray and said, "Maybe next year, just stick to dessert. That's easier." I turned to face her, and she smiled like she'd just offered a helpful suggestion. Sarai didn't look up, but I saw her hands clench. She was breathing slowly, in through the nose, out through the mouth. That's how she calms herself when she's trying not to break. I wanted to defend her. I wanted to scream, to tell Brenda exactly who Sarai was, what she had made, and what it meant. But I remembered the look Sarai gave me in the kitchen the night before. Calm, steady, determined. This wasn't my battle. The noise in the gym grew louder. Music started playing from the speakers. Kids danced near the stage. Parents circled the tables, chatting and taking pictures. And Sarai's tray of foil sat untouched, like it didn't belong. And then someone walked in. He wasn't from the school. He didn't look like anyone else in the room. He wore a black chef's coat and carried himself like someone who didn't need to explain why he was there. People turned. Someone whispered his name. Phones came out. Remy Vargas, celebrity chef, Michelin star, host of a food show everyone in that room watched, and he was heading toward the tables. When Chef Remy Vargas walked in, the entire room shifted. I'd only seen him on TV, leaning over simmering pots, tasting food with his eyes closed, like it was sacred. In person, he looked even more serious. Tall, lean, sharp-eyed, no entourage, just presence. People froze mid-conversation. Someone gasped and dropped their phone. Brenda straightened her back like she was in church. One dad elbowed his son and whispered, "That's the chef from Plated Truths." Chef Vargas walked past the entrance like he owned the space. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't waving. He was scanning the tables like he was on a mission. Brenda's table was in his path, so naturally, she perked up. "Chef Vargas," she said with a laugh that was too bright. "I'm Brenda Malloy. This is my tiramisu, made with imported mascarpone." She flipped her blonde hair over her shoulder like it was a secret ingredient. He gave her the smallest nod but didn't stop walking. He moved table by table, lifting lids, taking in smells. He didn't taste anything. He didn't comment. He was quiet, focused, methodical. And then he stopped, right in front of Sarai's tray. He didn't touch it at first, just stood still, breathing in. His brow furrowed slightly like something had surprised him. Then he leaned forward and slowly peeled back the foil. Steam rose up. The scent of jerk spices filled the air. Smoky, sweet, sharp with Scotch bonnet and thyme. He didn't speak right away. He looked around the room. "Who made this?" The gym fell quiet. Conversations paused. Someone turned the music down. Brenda laughed again, awkward this time. "Oh, I think that's just one of the, homemade entries." Chef Vargas didn't look at her. He repeated the question louder. "Who made this?" No one answered. I turned to Sarai, whose eyes were wide. She looked at me like she was trying to decide whether she was allowed to speak. I gave her a small nod. She raised her hand. Chef Vargas walked toward her. People parted like a wave. He crouched slightly so they were eye to eye. "You made this?" he asked. Sarai nodded. "How old are you?" 12, she said softly. He smiled, not a big smile, just the kind that says you've seen something rare. Then he turned back to the tray, tore off a small piece of chicken with his fingers, and tasted it. His eyes closed. People leaned in. I didn't breathe. He stood back up. "This is the most honest food on these tables. Who taught you to cook like that?" "My great-grandmother," Sarai said, "and my mom." "You cook like someone who listens to the food," he said. "That's rare. You ever think about becoming a chef?" She hesitated. Then she said, "Sometimes. I like feeding people." "That's the right reason." He turned to me next. "She has a gift. If you're open to it, I run a youth test kitchen during the summer. She'd have a spot." I felt my throat tighten. I nodded quickly, trying not to cry. He turned back to Sarai. "You made this with foil. That's how my grandmother kept the flavor in, too. Never forget where you learned to cook." Then he stood up and clapped once. Just once. And people followed. A wave of applause filled the gym. Not polite clapping. Real applause. Some people looked embarrassed. Others looked amazed. Sarai didn't move. She was frozen in the middle of it all, blinking like it hadn't hit her yet. Brenda's face was blank. For once, she had nothing to say. Chef Vargas took one more piece of chicken, gave Sarai a nod, and walked out the way he came in. Quiet, confident, done. As soon as the door closed behind him, people swarmed the table. Sarai's tray, which had sat untouched all evening, was suddenly surrounded. Spoons scraped, compliments flew. A girl asked if she could take some home. A teacher came over and said she'd never tasted anything so bold from a student. I crouched beside Sarai. "Are you okay?" She looked at me, eyes shining. They finally saw it. Yes, they did. And I realized then this wasn't just about food. This was about the voice behind it, the hands that made it, the girl who stood in a room full of judgment and didn't flinch. After Chef Vargas walked out, the gym was different. The noise didn't return the same way. People were quieter now, more deliberate. For the first time all evening, the foil tray wasn't being ignored. It was surrounded. Someone had brought over a new set of tongs. Another parent offered their serving spoon. Kids were asking questions. Adults were going back for seconds. A few people took out their phones and started taking pictures, not of themselves, but of the food. Sarai stood still through all of it. She wasn't smiling, not yet. She just watched them eat, watched the ones who had walked past without a glance now pile her food onto their plates. Some of the same kids who had earlier skipped her table were now hovering near it, whispering about how good it smelled. One woman came up to her and said, "I had no idea that was yours. This is incredible. You're really talented." Sarai thanked her politely, then turned back to the tray. Her voice was calm, her posture solid. She didn't gloat. She didn't brag. She didn't even look at Brenda. She didn't need to. Brenda, meanwhile, stood by her empty tiramisu dish, no longer the center of attention. Her friends had drifted off. Her face was stiff, still holding the posture of a smile, but nothing was behind it. She finally turned toward us, maybe to say something, maybe to try to smooth things over, but Sarai had already moved on. A student walked over with a clipboard. "Sarai, the principal wants to speak with you. Do you mind coming to the front?" She hesitated for a second, then followed him. I stayed close but gave her space. She walked past rows of tables, past kids still dancing near the stage, past parents who were now whispering about her instead of over her. When she reached the front, the principal leaned down and shook her hand. "I just wanted to say congratulations," he said. "You represented your culture with heart. This is what the potluck is supposed to be about." She nodded quietly. "Thank you." Then he turned to the crowd and raised his voice. "Before we end the evening, I'd like to recognize a student whose dish made a deep impression, not only on one of the world's most respected chefs, but on all of us here tonight. Sarai Dorsey, thank you for sharing your story and your food." The applause came again, stronger this time, real clapping from parents, kids, staff. Brenda clapped too, slow and mechanical. Sarai didn't bow or wave, she just smiled. It was the kind of smile that says, "I knew I belonged here. You just didn't see it yet." Afterward, people came up to us in waves. A father asked if she offered cooking lessons. A teacher asked if she'd consider writing a recipe for the school blog. Another mom said, "I'm sorry I didn't try your food earlier." I judged too fast. Sarai simply said, "That's okay. I cook for the people who are hungry." I nearly broke down right there. As the gym emptied, we packed up what little was left of her dish. The tray that had sat untouched for so long was nearly clean. Just a few grains of rice, a bone or two. Sarai folded the foil gently, like it was still important. She placed it back in the reusable bag and zipped it shut. Outside, the night was cool. The parking lot buzzed with parents loading cars and kids running in sneakers. Sarai walked beside me, quiet again. I looked over at her and said, "You okay?" She nodded. "Better than okay." Then, after a pause, she added, "When he asked who made it, I was scared to raise my hand. No, but I'm glad I did. So am I." We got in the car, and before I even started the engine, she turned to me. "Can we try Grandma's oxtail stew next? I want to make it right." That's when I realized this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of Sarai choosing to be seen, to be heard, not by being loud, but by being true to who she was. And after what happened in that gym, no one would ever underestimate her again. The next morning, Sarai woke up before I did. I walked into the kitchen and found her scribbling something in her notebook, the one she keeps for recipes. She looked up and smiled like she had just solved a puzzle. I poured myself coffee and sat across from her. She turned the notebook toward me. At the top of the page, she had written, "Legacy Meals. First entry, jerk chicken, by Nana." Underneath, she listed each ingredient with care. She even added a note about how long to let the chicken rest before cooking. Something I never taught her. That came from observation, from instinct, from love. I said, "That's beautiful." She said, "I want to make all her dishes. I want to write them down so no one forgets." That's when I knew the potluck wasn't just a win or a lucky moment. It was a turning point in how Sarai saw herself. Before that night, she loved to cook, but it was private. It was a quiet thing, just between us and memory. Now she wanted to share it with the world. The school kept talking about it for days. A photo of Chef Vargas standing next to her dish ended up in the district newsletter. Teachers stopped her in the hallway to ask how she made the mango glaze. One even asked if she could speak to the third graders about Caribbean food for their social studies unit. But none of that changed her. She stayed the same, still quiet, still steady, still choosing her words like ingredients. Only what's needed, nothing extra. Brenda never apologized. Not directly, but she kept her distance after that. At the next PTA meeting, she introduced a motion to give more recognition to student contributions during school events. No one missed the irony. Sarai never mentioned her again. I started to notice how people looked at Sarai differently after that night. Not because she had been validated by a famous chef, but because she had proven what grace under fire looks like. She didn't fight back with words or anger. She let her work speak for itself. And it did. One evening, about a week later, Sarai and I were in the kitchen prepping oxtail stew. She was trimming the meat, focused and confident. I asked her, "What did that night feel like for you?" She paused for a second, then said, "At first, I thought they didn't care because it wasn't fancy. But then I realized they just didn't understand it yet." I said, "And now?" She looked me straight in the eye and said, "Now they do." We finished the stew, wrapped it in foil just like Nana used to, and brought it over to my neighbor, Mrs. Washington, who had just come home from surgery. Sarai knocked on her door and said, "We brought something warm." Mrs. Washington smiled, took a deep breath of the scent, and said, "I haven't smelled this since I was a girl." Later that night, as I tucked Sarai into bed, I sat at the edge of her mattress for a minute. She looked peaceful, content, like she had found her place, not just in school or at the potluck, but in her own story. "I'm proud of you," I said. She mumbled, "For what?" "For being brave in a room that tried to make you small, for staying kind when others weren't, for carrying Nana's legacy without needing anyone's permission." She didn't open her eyes, but she smiled. "Thanks, Mom." As I closed her door, I thought about how often we underestimate children, how often we dismiss foil trays, quiet voices, homemade food without labels. We forget that the loudest message can come from the quietest hand. The truth is, Sarai didn't need the applause. She didn't need validation from a celebrity chef. But what she gained that night wasn't fame. It was faith. In herself, in her roots, in the power of showing up, even when no one's watching. Now, when I look at her, I don't just see my daughter. I see a young woman building something real, one meal at a time. And I know this was just the beginning. So the next time someone laughs at the kid who walks in with a tray wrapped in foil, I hope they remember this story. Because sometimes the foil holds more than food. Sometimes it holds a legacy. Thank you for listening to our story. If this reminded you of a moment where you or someone you love stood tall in the face of judgment, share it in the comments. I read every single one. Your voice matters here. If Sarai's story moved you, if it made you feel something, do me a favor. The video so more people can hear stories like this. Share it with someone who needs the reminder that quiet strength is still strength. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories that cut through the noise and speak to the heart, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss what's next. Because sometimes, all it takes is one brave girl, one homemade meal, and one moment of truth to remind us all. Greatness doesn't need to shout. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next one. I remember the moment my name wasn't called. My breath caught in my throat as the lawyer folded the pages of the will and placed them gently on the mahogany desk. His expression was neutral, almost too neutral, like he already knew how this would go. My hands trembled slightly in my lap, but I tried to hide it beneath the folds of my black dress. The estate study felt colder than I remembered. The curtains were pulled back, sunlight pooling over the dust motes in the air, and outside birds chirped like it was just another spring morning. Inside, it felt like the air had frozen. I sat between my cousins, Emily and Daniel, both dressed in head-to-toe black like they were starring in some made-for-TV drama. Emily's perfume, something floral and sickly sweet, hung in the air. Daniel tapped one perfectly polished shoe against the wooden floor, just enough to be irritating. Then the lawyer cleared his throat. I, Marlene Atwood, being of sound mind and memory, do hereby declare this as my final will and testament. My stomach twisted into a knot. I kept waiting, expecting to hear my name. For some mention of the years I spent helping Aunt Marlene reorganize her attic, planting those ridiculous rose bushes, laughing with her over endless cups of mint tea. But the words came and went, and my name never followed them. Instead, to my beloved niece Emily and my nephew Daniel, I leave the entirety of my estate. Everything after that blurred. I sat frozen. My fingers gripped the arm of the leather chair so hard it squeaked. I felt heat rise to my face and my heart slammed in my chest. I couldn't look at anyone, couldn't breathe for a moment. Why? Why would she leave me out completely? Emily leaned toward me, lips curved into something that was supposed to resemble pity, but her eyes gleamed like a cat who'd just eaten the last canary. She told us, "You were too distant in the end," she whispered. Said it broke her heart. Her voice was syrupy, soft, fake. I blinked at her, my mouth slightly open, trying to process the words, but they stung too much to really land. Too distant? She said that? My thoughts spiraled. Had I really been that absent? I hadn't visited as much this past year, sure, but life got busy. Work, bills, moving. Still, we talked, we texted. She sent me a card just 2 weeks before she passed. It said, "My garden's blooming and I wish you were here." Why would she send that if she felt abandoned? Something didn't feel right. Daniel, for his part, stayed silent, just nodded solemnly like the good little heir. But I saw the flicker in his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking, that tiny nervous shift in his jaw, like someone who knew the truth was leaking through the cracks. And then there was the lawyer. He avoided my eyes the entire time. He fumbled with his glasses, shuffled the papers again, and then quickly began explaining the probate process to Emily and Daniel like I wasn't even there. I stood up slowly. My legs were shaky beneath me, but I forced a small, polite nod toward the lawyer. "Thank you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily smiled again, tight, smug, like the kind of smile you give someone who just lost a game they didn't even know they were playing. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of Mrs. Hawthorne, the housekeeper, standing quietly in the hallway. Her eyes met mine. She didn't say a word, but there was something there, something unspoken, something heavy. She looked concerned, and just as I passed her, she reached out, slipped a folded note into my hand, and walked away. I didn't open it until I got into my car. It said, "Meet me by the greenhouse." Midnight. I stared at that note in my hands for what felt like forever. The paper was slightly crumpled, folded neatly like it had been waiting. The handwriting was unmistakable. Mrs. Hawthorne's looping script, steady and exact, just like the way she polished Aunt Marlene's silver or arranged the tea service every afternoon at 4. The greenhouse. I hadn't stepped foot in it since the last time I visited, 6 months ago. It was always Aunt Marlene's favorite place. Quiet, humid. Smelled like earth and lemongrass. She used to joke that it was her little jungle, her secret hideaway from the disaster of humans. Back then, I didn't think much of it. Now, I was thinking about everything. Driving home that day, I kept hearing Emily's voice on loop. She said you were too distant. over and over like a song I hated but couldn't stop singing. But here's the thing. Aunt Marlene never made me feel distant. Even when life pulled me in every direction, when I was juggling work and bills and barely had time to think, she always left the door open, literally. The last time I drove out here, she greeted me barefoot in the garden, her hair in a messy braid, dirt on her fingers, arms outstretched like I hadn't missed a beat. "Finally, my girl's home," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like rosemary and soil. She never judged, never made me feel guilty. She just loved me. So why would she leave me out of her will? That night, after I parked just beyond the estate gates, I walked through the back gardens, flashlight clutched in one hand, note in the other. Every step felt heavier than the last. My boots crunched softly over the gravel path, the chill in the air biting at my cheeks. The greenhouse stood ahead like a glass skeleton, glowing under the moonlight, half covered in ivy. I hadn't realized how eerie it could look at night. Inside, it was warmer. Steamy, almost. The scent of damp leaves and old clay pots hit me immediately. The shadows stretched long between rows of orchids and ferns. Mrs. Hawthorne was already there, standing perfectly still, hands clasped in front of her apron. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at me like she was trying to decide if I was still the little girl who used to chase butterflies around the hibiscus plants. Then she nodded once. "Your aunt never changed her will," she said quietly. "Not the real one." I felt my pulse skip. What? She updated it about 2 months before she passed. I was there when she signed it. We even had a notary come to the house. She said she didn't want to leave anything to chance. I couldn't breathe for a moment. The greenhouse suddenly felt too warm. Then why? Why wasn't it red today? Mrs. Hawthorne reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. She placed it gently into my palm like it was made of glass. "Because someone made sure it wouldn't be," she said. "But your aunt, she thought that might happen." I stared at the flash drive. It felt unreal, like I was holding a secret too big for one person to carry. My fingers tightened around it instinctively. Mrs. Hawthorne stepped closer. Her eyes, usually so calm, were sharp with quiet anger. "She trusted you. She told me, if anything happens to me, give this to her." I swallowed hard, heart pounding in my ears. "Watch it," she said. "Then you'll understand everything." I didn't sleep that night. The flash drive sat next to my laptop for hours before I worked up the nerve to click play. I just stared at it, trying to slow my racing thoughts. What was on it? A letter? A video? Would it confirm what I hoped, or what I feared? When I finally plugged it in, the file was simple. No password, no encryption, just a single video named Final Will, March 7th. The moment it opened, I stopped breathing. There she was, Aunt Marlene, sitting in her favorite chair. The faded velvet one with the frayed armrest from where the cat used to scratch. She looked tired, but alert, confident even. Her voice was clear. "This is Marlene Atwood," she began, looking straight at the camera. "This is to confirm that today I am signing an updated will. I am of sound mind, and this is being witnessed and notarized." My hands flew to my mouth. In the corner of the frame sat a man in a tan blazer, flipping through a folder. "I'm Daniel Collins, licensed notary. I'm here today at the request of Ms. Atwood." She turned to him and smiled. "Thank you, Daniel." Then she turned back to the camera. "To be clear, I want my entire estate, including the property, financial assets, and personal belongings, to go to my niece, my name." I felt something catch in my chest, like a breath I'd been holding for months finally escaped. "I love my family," she said gently, "but this estate, it's always belonged to someone who understands it, who lives it, and that's her." Tears blurred my vision, but I kept watching, every word etched into my bones. She wanted me to have it. She trusted me. She hadn't changed. They had. The video ended with her signature, the notary's stamp and a timestamp. March 7th, 11:12 a.m., 2 weeks before she died, 2 weeks before they locked me out of her house. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. 1,000 thoughts raced through me. Who had seen this? Why wasn't this version read at the estate meeting? Someone had buried this. I pulled out the original letter from the lawyer's folder, the one they read at the estate, dated March 1st, a week before this video. So the question wasn't whether Marlene changed her will. The question was, who made the original one disappear? And then, something even darker crossed my mind. Someone knew about this video, and they still pretended I didn't exist. I needed answers. Real ones. I needed someone who could confirm this wasn't just a sentimental recording. Someone outside the family, someone with a license and a reason to tell the truth. I picked up my phone and searched the notary's name. Daniel Collins, certified notary, retired early 2023, living in Crestwood County. He was only a few hours away. The next morning, I called him. I didn't even know what I was going to say. My voice shook the entire time. But as soon as I mentioned Aunt Marlene, he said, "I remember her. Lovely woman. She insisted we film the signing to protect her niece." He paused. "That wasn't the will they read, was it?" I said nothing. I didn't have to. He sighed. "I'll get in touch with the state registrar. If someone forged something, it won't stay buried for long." I hung up the phone and just sat there. Everything I thought I lost wasn't lost. It was stolen, and I was going to get it back. By the time I pulled up to the estate the next morning, the clouds had rolled in thick and gray, like the sky knew a storm was coming. I hadn't called ahead. I didn't want to give them the chance to hide anything else. As I walked through the heavy front doors, I half expected to be stopped. But the place was quiet. Almost too quiet. The kind of silence that follows after someone's been caught but hasn't figured out how to admit it yet. Emily was in the sunroom, flipping through a magazine with a cup of coffee like nothing had happened. Her legs were crossed, her posture too perfect. She barely looked up when I walked in. "Well," she said without a smile, "back so soon?" I didn't answer right away. My heart was hammering, but I kept my expression even. Calm. I needed her to underestimate me, just for a little longer. Daniel walked in from the hallway, phone in hand. He froze when he saw me, just for a second. But I saw it, that flash of annoyance, or maybe fear. He covered it quickly, sliding the phone into his pocket. I looked at both of them, steady and measured. "We need to talk." Emily raised an eyebrow. "If this is about the will—" "It's about the real will," I said, cutting her off. My voice was soft, but I felt the steel in it. "The one Aunt Marlene signed on March 7th. The one you never mentioned." Daniel blinked. His jaw twitched. Emily's fingers stiffened around her cup. "You can drop the act," I said. "I've seen the video, the notarized one, the one where she leaves everything to me." No one spoke. The silence stretched so long I could hear the faint ticking of the antique wall clock behind them, like it was counting down to the end of their lie. "I've already spoken to the notary," I continued. "He remembers it. He's testifying." Emily finally set her cup down. Her lips parted, searching for the right lie, but the words just stalled. Daniel exhaled sharply, turning toward the window like he couldn't even look at me. "You don't understand," he muttered. She didn't mean to." "She did," I said flatly. "And she made sure someone would know, that someone was me." The room was starting to feel heavier now, denial slipping off them like a mask after a long performance. I could see it in their eyes, panic creeping in behind the false calm. "She trusted me," I said, my voice cracking a little despite how hard I tried to hold it steady, "and you both tried to erase that." No one denied it. No angry rebuttals, no fake outrage, just quiet, because deep down, they knew. And that silence said everything. I turned to leave, but just before I reached the door, Daniel said, "You won't get away with this." I paused, half-turned. "I'm not the one who did anything wrong," I said. "But you stole from a dead woman." He didn't have a comeback. I stepped outside into the cold air, my hands shaking, my heart still racing. But it felt different now. Not fear, clarity. I wasn't chasing shadows anymore. I had truth on my side. And the moment the court saw that video, everything was going to change. The hearing was scheduled just 10 days later. 10 days of waiting, pacing, questioning if I had done enough. 10 days of imagining every possible outcome, what they might say, how they might twist it. But also, 10 days of remembering Aunt Marlene's voice in that video. Calm. Certain. Her love for me etched into every word. That's what kept me going. The courtroom was quiet when I arrived, Clean beige walls, heavy wooden benches. A judge who looked bored and slightly irritated to be up so early. My lawyer, Mr. DeSoto, gave me a firm nod as I slid into the seat beside him. He'd been the one to file the petition to challenge the will, armed with the video, the notary's statement, and a letter from Mrs. Hawthorne, detailing what she'd witnessed the day of the real signing. Emily and Daniel were already there. Emily wore a navy suit and a necklace I recognized. Aunt Marlene's. My stomach turned. Daniel sat stiffly beside her, scrolling through his phone until the bailiff told him to put it away. He didn't look at me. Their lawyer stood, all buttoned-up charm and false authority, and began with a speech about family disputes and misunderstandings. It was carefully rehearsed and deeply hollow. But then Mr. DeSoto stood, calm, precise. "Your Honor," he said, "the video you're about to see captures the signing of a second legally binding will, witnessed and notarized, which supersedes the version presented at the initial reading." The judge tilted his head slightly. "Proceed." The lights dimmed slightly as the bailiff turned on the monitor, and there she was, Aunt Marlene, looking alive again. I hadn't realized how emotional it would be, seeing her in that moment. She looked so clear-eyed, so deliberate. The courtroom fell still as her voice filled the space. "I leave my estate to my niece, my name, who has always been more than family. She is my legacy." Every word hit like a heartbeat. My heartbeat. I glanced at Emily. Her face was frozen, but her hands were clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. Daniel didn't blink. His jaw was locked like he might shatter his own teeth. When the video ended, the notary was called to the stand. Mr. Collins walked in with quiet dignity. He confirmed everything, the date, the signatures, that he had no reason to believe Marlene was under duress or confused. His testimony was clear, factual, and impossible to argue with. Then the judge turned to their lawyer. "Do you contest the validity of this video?" A long pause. The lawyer swallowed. "No, Your Honor." That was it. No dramatic objections, no angry outbursts, just defeat. Deflation. The judge nodded and scribbled a few notes. "The court will recognize the March 7th will as the final and legally binding testament of Marlene Atwood." The gavel struck once. It echoed like thunder. I exhaled. I hadn't even realized I was holding my breath. Emily stormed out of the courtroom. Daniel followed, head down. Not a word. No apology. Just silence again. But this time it was theirs to carry. Mr. DeSoto touched my shoulder gently. "She trusted you for a reason." I nodded, barely able to speak, not because I was angry or smug, but because finally someone had listened. And finally Aunt Marlene's voice had been heard. After the hearing, I didn't rush back into the estate. I just sat in my car for a while, engine off, forehead resting against the steering wheel. The quiet was different now, not empty or cold, but heavy in a way that felt real. Like something had settled into place finally. It wasn't just about the house, or the land, or even the money. It was about her, about being seen, about not letting someone rewrite the truth after she was gone. I walked through the front doors the next day and everything felt sharper. The air, the light, the silence. This time I noticed things. Her favorite shawl still draped over the armchair, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the hall, a teacup left on the windowsill, just like the one she used every morning, always forgetting to bring it back in. I wandered into her study, fingertips brushing over the spines of her books. Some were the same ones she used to read to me when I was little. I remembered sitting on her lap, curled up like a cat, falling asleep to the sound of her voice. And there it was, on her desk, a small wrapped package with my name in her handwriting. My heart jumped. I picked it up carefully. The wrapping was plain, just brown paper tied with twine. Inside was one of her old journals, leather-bound, worn around the edges. I opened it slowly, not sure what I was about to find. On the first page, she'd written, "For the daughter I chose. If you're reading this, it means you kept your promise, even when it wasn't easy. Thank you for loving me exactly as I was." I didn't even try to stop the tears. I let them fall, hot and heavy, onto the page, because that's what all of this had really been about. Not about proving Emily or Daniel wrong, not about fighting for an inheritance. It was about making sure Aunt Marlene wasn't erased, about honoring what we had, quiet, honest, imperfect, but real. Over the next few weeks, I started putting the pieces back together. I stayed at the estate, sorting through memories, deciding what to keep, what to donate, what to breathe life into again. Mrs. Hawthorne helped. She never said, "I told you so," but I could see it in her smile. That quiet satisfaction of knowing the right person had finally come home. Sometimes I'd catch her in the garden, humming while trimming back the roses. Aunt Marlene's roses, the ones we planted together the summer I turned 12. I think that's when I knew. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was her. It was Sunday dinners and lavender soap and handwritten notes left in books. It was warm baths when I had a fever and belly laughs over tea. It was a lifetime of tiny kindnesses no will could ever measure, and now it was mine to protect. Looking back, I've learned something I'll never forget. When people lie, they usually expect you to stay quiet, to doubt yourself, to walk away. But when someone loves you the way she did, they leave you the truth. Sometimes it's hidden in a flash drive, sometimes it's tucked in a journal, and sometimes it's just in the way the roses keep blooming, year after year, whether anyone's watching or not. So, yeah, that's my story. It still feels surreal sometimes, how close I came to walking away thinking I didn't matter. But if there's anything I've learned, it's this. Silence doesn't mean absence, and love, real love, leaves traces. You just have to trust yourself enough to follow them. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt overlooked or underestimated, I'd really love to hear about it. Share your story in the comments. I read every single one, and your voice matters here. If you felt something while watching this, if it made you think of someone you miss or someone you fought for, please like the video. It really helps more people find stories like this. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it. Text it to them. DM it. Stories can heal. They can open eyes. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I've got more stories coming. Real ones, raw ones, the kind that stay with you long after the video ends. And I'd love to have you with me. Thank you for being here. Really. Until next time.